Well, we've spoken before in this room or others in the city on various fairy tales like Aladdin and his wonderful lamp and Jack and the Beanstalk and Cinderella, and then more modern ones, relatively speaking, like Alice in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz. And I'm just going to give a bit of an introduction. I've said much of this before, these opening paragraphs, that those familiar with The Secret Doctrine is in Volume 1. There's a section called The Mystery Language and Its Keys. Madame Blavatsky points out that there's one universal esoteric or mystery language, some call it the sacred language, which underlies all the sacred traditions of humankind. Blavatsky writes, all the ancient records were written in a language which was universal and known to all nations alike in days of old, but which is now intelligible only to the few. Nevin Drinkwater, a theosophist and liberal Catholic priest of last century, delivered the Blavatsky lecture of 1944, and I found it quite hard to get a copy of this online. I couldn't find one. I eventually bought a rather battered copy of it in published form, quite expensive on Amazon.com, but it was well worth it. His lecture was Theosophy and the Western Mysteries, and it deserves to be wider circulated. And Drinkwater stated that the principal Western mysteries which have survived may be said to consist of 5 great traditions, handed on by combinations of oral, written, or ceremonial means. Oral, written, or ceremonial means. The 5 great traditions, he said, are 1. Freemasonry, 2. Alchemy, or the Hermetic tradition, 3. The Kabbalah, or the mysteries of the Tree of Life, 4. Myths and fairy stories, that's where ours comes in today, and 5, wait for it, Christian mysticism. Lord Bacon said, referring to the myths and tales of antiquity, said, under some of the ancient fictions lay couched certain mysteries. How true that is. Going back to Drinkwater and his Blavatsky lecture, he said, the mystery tradition of childhood is a very special tradition. It can be taken as axiomatic that no fairy story will live unless it has some esoteric significance. This is probably true even of riddles and nursery rhymes. He went on to say, a fairy story lives precisely because it contains hidden truths which the child's ego recognises and accepts, before, as so often happens, our modern methods of education stifle its intuition and imagination. Conditioning. Remember, Krishnamurti had a lot to say about conditioning. Basically, it's not a very good thing. Well, in terms of ancient symbology, there's always some sort of a key or keys. First thing to realise is that many, if not all, of the recorded events in the story or tale that supposedly happen, if maybe in a fictional world, but in an objective sense, that really they're said to take place in the consciousness of the reader, their inner events in consciousness. It's the first thing to realise. And then every character in the story or tale portrays some state or condition, the human condition, or something about our character, consciousness, or our spiritual development at some stage or other along the evolutionary path. So we see our strengths revealed and our weaknesses and our potentialities. Thirdly, each story or tale is a graphic, figurative description of some phase or phases of the evolutionary journey of the soul towards its ultimate perfection. Fourthly, objects such as rivers and mountains and valleys and deserts and trees and ladders and staircases, inheritances, giants, men and women, all have their own allegorical or spiritual meanings. I'm going to give one version of the tale of Beauty and the Beast, and I'm going to give a fairly long, detailed account of the story, more so than I've done in the past, because this fairy tale is more complex and the story is more complicated than most of them are. Most fairy tales you can give the basic rudimentary plot in about 10 lines. Here it takes about 5 pages, and even then that's only a crude summary. Now there's been many versions of the tale, and like most of these stories, it's a little bit difficult to know who originated it, but with Beauty and the Beast, it seems to have been a French tale originally, La Belle et la Bête, written by a French novelist, Madame de Villeneuve, first published in 1740, so fairly recent really, in La Jeune Américaine et les Contes Marins, Young American and Marine Tales. But there's been other versions of it as well, one by Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont and various others. And you can look that up on Wikipedia if you like, or anywhere else, and you'll see there's different versions of it. And of course Disney's given us 1 or 2 versions as well. We have various perennial themes, as we'll see, that are common to almost every fairy tale. We have some sort of a descent or fall or loss, and eventually, after some sort of evolution and mutation, we have a period of growth and often struggle. We have recovery of one's true self, or recovery to one's true self. Anyway, a brief synopsis of the Beauty and the Beast. And one of the problems here is that there are various versions of it. Some versions say that this old merchant, some don't refer to him as a merchant, just as a widow, that he had 3 daughters. That's generally accepted that he had 3 daughters. Some also say he actually had 6 children, 3 sons as well. It really doesn't matter because the sons don't feature at all in the story. But the 3 daughters do quite prominently, and one in particular, Beauty. Well, anyway, let's just give one version of the tale that's widely used and found in children's stories. Once there lived a widowed, rich, or once rich, she's not rich at the time the story begins, merchant. He was once rich, and he had 3 daughters. The 2 elder ones were rather ugly and very materialistic in their nature. The youngest was very sweet and lovely, and all who knew her called her Beauty. Now, this name made her 2 sisters very jealous, and they hated her and envied her, and treated her more like a servant than a sister. The merchant, as I said, was once very rich, but it seems he lost all his wealth. His ships were wrecked in a great storm, and his riches sunk to the bottom of the sea. I'm not really wanting to give a running commentary as I go along, but there's something so obvious and important that I'll mention, the image there of the great deep, that it surrounds and contains all things, including us. But there is this somehow, the ships going down, the wealth going down, this descent of spirit into matter. Well, he was forced to give up his possessions. There was nothing left for him to do but to move into a little cottage which stood in the middle of a forest. His 2 older daughters were very dissatisfied because of the change in their fortunes, because they were used to a very materialistic sort of existence. Beauty, though, was quite content with this much reduced circumstances. And, like a good soul, she willingly agreed to do all the work round the house. The merchant in time became more successful, and there's different versions of how he became more successful, but the most commonly told one is that it turned out that one of the ships didn't actually sink at sea. It didn't go to the bottom of the ocean, and one of his trade ships that had been sent off actually arrived back in port. So he managed to regain some of his wealth, and in time, more so. But don't think that that wealth there should be interpreted too materialistically. It's really a spiritual riches that are being gained or recovered. As the merchant regained some wealth, he said to his daughters, when he was going off on a trip, what he should bring them back. And the oldest one said, I would like a beautiful silk dress, dyed all colours of the rainbow, and a cloak of satin and some shoes embroidered with diamonds. So she was very much into material things, as was the second daughter, who asked for jewellery. Beauty, when asked what she wanted, said, "Just bring me back a red rose." And there's some symbolism in the red rose too, Rosicrucian and all that, but let's just leave that for the time being. We'll come back to that perhaps later. She just wanted a red rose. I mean, some of the symbolism in this is so obvious, it's very hard to see how people can't quite understand that they are more than just a story. And perhaps even young children, has been said, they don't understand the symbolism at a conscious level, but perhaps at an unconscious level they do. Hence that universal appeal. Even with the most gruesome fairy tales, some of which are quite horrible on the surface. The merchant was away for nearly a year and was so fortunate to recover a great part of his lost wealth. He was easily able to buy the things his eldest daughters desired, but he couldn't find that red rose for Beauty. He journeyed home without it, but lost his way in a thick wood. Suddenly he saw a bright light which proved to come from a castle which stood in the heart of the forest. Entering this, the door being wide open, he found a table laid with every delicacy. He sat down, ate a good meal, and in a few minutes was fast asleep. On awakening in the morning, he discovered a hearty breakfast prepared for him. Leaving the castle and passing through its garden, he came to an avenue of rose trees, all covered with beautiful red blooms. One bud will not be missed, he thought. He broke that off, and I'll take that for Beauty. Scarcely had he done this when he heard a terrible noise, and turning around he saw coming toward him a hideous monster, unlike any other animal in the world. "Ungrateful wretch," roared the beast, "you have eaten of my food. You have slept in my house, and in return you try to rob me of my roses. For this theft you shall die." The merchant fell on his knees and begged for pardon, but the beast would not listen to him. "Either you must die now, or else you must send in your stead the first living thing that meets you on your return home." In terror, the merchant promises, and is horror struck on his return. The first person he sees is his youngest daughter, the Beauty. She was the first one to run out and greet him, not surprisingly. He told her of this promise that he had to keep. And typical of Beauty, she willingly went. She was prepared to face whatever was her lot, her fate. They'd be the right words, and they're probably not. Anyway, she assured her father that probably the beast would not prove so terrible after all, that he might spare her life as her father's had been spared. At the palace of the beast, all was comfort and convenience. A beautiful bedchamber was ready for her use. The rooms were filled with everything she could possibly want, and in the great hall of the castle a table was set with every delicacy. Everywhere there were bowls full of red roses. No servants were visible. Unseen hands waited upon her and attended to her every want. In the evening the beast appeared. He was certainly very terrible to look at, but kindness itself, and so gentle and respectful that Beauty soon lost all fear. She became very fond of him, and would have been very happy except for the thought of her father and sisters, whom she felt she should visit. She missed them, even those older sisters. I should mention, though, that every night, and this is in one tale but not in the other, the beast would ask Beauty to marry him, only to be refused each time. After each refusal, Beauty dreams of a handsome prince. This handsome prince is speaking to Beauty by a pool in a beautiful garden. And he tells her not to be deceived by appearances. This prince in the dream pleads with Beauty to answer why she keeps refusing him, to which she replies that she cannot marry the beast because she loves him only as a friend. Beauty does not make the connection between the handsome prince and the beast, and becomes convinced that the beast is holding the prince captive somewhere in the castle. She searches and discovers multiple enchanted runes, but never the prince from her dreams. One evening, when the beast came to visit her at the usual hour, Beauty begged permission to go and visit her father. The beast was very loath to grant her request. He said, "If I let you go, I'm afraid you will never come back, and then I shall die of grief." Beauty promised faithfully to return after a few days. At last the beast consented, put this ring, we've got a magic ring here, put this ring on your little finger when you go to bed tonight and wish to be home, and in the morning you will be there. Well, she went home. Beauty's father was filled with joy at seeing her again. Her jealous sisters, however, envious of her success, conspired to keep her over the week, thinking that if she were so delayed, the beast would kill her on her return. Beauty was distressed at their apparent grief at parting with her, and moved by their pretended affection for her, consented to stay just one more day. That night, as she lay in bed, she had a dream. She dreamed that she saw the beast dying of sorrow at her forgetfulness and her absence. Reproaching herself for breaking her promise to the beast, she hastily rose from her bed, searched for the magic ring, and the beast had given her. Putting it on her little finger, she wished to be once more at his palace. In a moment she was there. It'll soon finish, don't worry. At once she hurried to look for the beast. She searched through room after room, but he was not to be found. At last, in the garden, by a fountain on a little plot of grass, she found him, stretched on the ground as if he was dead. As if dead. With a bitter cry, Beauty sank on her knees beside him. "My dear, dear beast," she cried, "how could I have been so wicked and unkind? He has died of sorrow, as he said he would." And the tears fell down from her eyes as she spoke. Overcome with grief and remorse, she stooped down and tenderly kissed the ugly beast. A sudden noise, and Beauty was surprised to find that the ugly monster had vanished, and in his place was a handsome prince who knelt at her feet. "A wicked fairy," he said, "condemned me to keep the form of a beast until a beautiful maiden should forget my ugliness and kiss me. You, by your love and tenderness, have broken the spell and released me from my horrible disguise. Now, thanks to you, I can take my proper form." Once a prince, became a beast. Now he's regained his proper form. There's great symbolism there. Then he begged Beauty to become his bride. So Beauty married the prince who had been a beast, and was now again a prince. They lived together in the castle, and ruling over the prince's country were, and how do all fairy tales finish? Happy ever after. As I said at the start, the characters in this fairy tale, as in others, and in myths too, which are longer type fairy tales, they represent different aspects or facets of the human condition and our being, your being and mine as a person. In other words, the events depicted are inner. That's the true nature of esotericism. Now, I've got a section here in my paper, explanation of the story. Well, it's just kind of mine, but it's not really, I don't have any original thoughts. It's been gleaned from a number of different sources. That's what's called research. You see, I did a couple of degrees at uni doing that. You borrow from one source or steal from one source, and that's called plagiarism. If you do it from a lot of them and do it very well, and you mix it all up together, and nobody knows where they came from. That's called research, apparently. You probably heard that. It's hardly worth the feeble boys have got. Anyway, there we go. Now, you've got two parallel allegorical stories in this one we just looked at. And still to look at. You've got the story of the merchant, the father, the widow, who has kind of fallen from grace, if you like, or has really, it's just the human spiritual soul which has descended into matter, so the spirit descending into matter. That's the descent, and losing everything, and ultimately a recovery of wealth, spiritually interpreted. And then you've got the story of this prince that ended up a beast and then has gone back to being a prince. So you've got these two parallel things going on there. And they're really telling the same thing, but different images. This is just one interpretation of the story, but it's consistent with the approach of most people to this and how you consider male characters and female characters. But in the esoteric or sacred or mystery tradition, men generally represent the human soul. So we've got the merchant or father, let's just start with him, who's kind of the human soul. Any human soul, doesn't necessarily have to be that of a man. And as we saw at the beginning, he had, it seems, lost all or most of his wealth at sea. He's come down from the pristine source, the great deep in ancient philosophy. Loses his spiritual wealth, temporarily at least, in an ocean of matter on his incarnation in the flesh. We too leave a fine residence and gardens to live in a cottage in the woods for a while on this earth, a wilderness of human life, and a lot of misery along the way and trials and tribulations, but it's all part of the journey, the path. We're told that he recovered a lot of his wealth. He gradually realised the potency of the divine spark within him. I mean, if the riches were literally at the bottom of the ocean, as was stated originally in the story, he wouldn't have been able to recover them at all. So we have to interpret it allegorically or spiritually. When he recovers his wealth, or part of it rather, he asks each daughter what presents she desires, and each chooses appropriately according to their stage of growth. The oldest daughter, often said to represent the physical nature. Well, she asked for a beautiful silk dress and various other accoutrements or accessories. And the second daughter represents the mental faculty. So we've got the physical body and we've got the mental. They're rather coarse and ugly because they are imperfectly developed. They choose material things as gifts. Beauty may be said to represent spiritual loveliness, spiritual self in us, divine spark, if you like, different images. But there is some potency within each and every one of us. This divine spark that is capable of being made into a big fire. And she's always the one that did all the work around the house, as I said in the story. She's virtuous and hard-working, and reminds me of a verse in the Bible where Jesus said, the Father who is within, he doeth the works. Well, that's kind of the image there too of beauty at work. She chooses a red rose as the gift she craves. A rose being, of course, a symbol of love. So symbolises the desire to grow spiritually. You've got some Rosicrucian symbolism there, perhaps, perpetuation of the secret tenets of the Egyptian Hermes, who knows, but why a red rose? It's obvious symbolism there. We're told that the father in his year's trip easily finds and buys the costly things, but can't easily find that simple rose. Why? Because it's not a mere physical rose that can easily be bought in a shop. It's a mystical rose. It's that, if you've seen like the rosy cross, it's the rose at the centre of a Latin cross. Well, there's a lot of images here of the I am or God spark in each one of us at the centre of our being. You can use different religious imagery without using the God word. It doesn't really matter. If Krishnamurti say the word is not the thing, let's just try to describe the concept behind it. You'll also realise that it's on this sort of rosy cross, called the cross symbol, that we must sacrifice our lower nature, crucify our false desires in order to find our higher self, which I think is the true esoteric meaning of Christian mysticism, not taking the cross in any crude, vicarious atonement sense, but as a crucifixion of all that is base and ignoble, and sacrificing our lower nature, our false selves, and all that we might find our true self, the real self that is eternal, immortal. So beauty then can be said to represent the spiritual or real self that is seeking full expression and development. The beast, fairly obvious symbolism there, can be said to represent the desires of the flesh, the unregenerate, the material emotions of the undeveloped. But remember, this beast was once a prince. We were all once a prince or princess, and we still are in potentiality. And our task is to overcome the beastly elements in our nature, in our being, to become that prince or princess that we are destined to be, and which in truth, in spiritual terms, we really are, hidden though it may be in some of us. We only have to look at the evening news, particularly on the commercial stations where they specialise in horrible stories, and another drive-by shooting in Marylands and whatever, and not Marylands, but so often it's something like that. They just love reporting the most ignoble and horrible elements of humanity. But even in the worst of us is that divine spark, always seeking more fulsome expression. Now, the castle of the beast is an interesting thing, the way it's described there. It's something not made by human hands, which reminds me of the imagery. It's biblical, but it's very important in Freemasonry. The King Solomon's Temple and most of Masonic ceremonies are relating to the Temple of King Solomon, at least in the lower degrees from what I've learnt. And there's no secret to share that we are building a spiritual temple, a temple not made with hands. Neither hammer nor axe nor any iron tool was heard in the house while it was being built. So there's something about the beast's temple. It is not an ordinary physical thing. It is a spiritual edifice that we are building through our thoughts and words and actions. You notice in the story that there were things happening, and there seemed to be servants at work in the castle, but they were invisible. If they were serving the body and the body's needs, that's the spiritual life at work there. The roses bloom in profusion in the gardens of the beast's residence. Symbolism there, of course. I can't go on all of it. The only true living things are the things of the spirit. And the spiritual is not entirely or ever satisfied to live on the sense plane alone. We have our cellars in our houses, metaphorically speaking or literally, but we generally live most of our time in the rooms above. We crave mental and spiritual stimulus. The spiritual is always seeking to express itself more fully. And there's the image of the dreams, of course, and the prince and all of that. I just want to comment on a couple of other things in the story. Beauty asks permission of the beast to leave, to go back to see her father and sisters. The beast, reluctantly, because he fears she may not come back, gives consent, but only for 7 days. Now, have you read anything of the ancient wisdom, or you looked at some of the Bible stories? The word 7 days of the week. 7 appears all the time. It's the most mystic number. Some say it's the most mystic number. Sacred numerology. I'm not talking about the numerology that some people are into, but the more sacred numerology that features in sacred literature. 7's a very mystical number, and it's all about individual completion or perfection. It's all about the conquest of the material nature by the spiritual. 8 is generally seen as the number of death. It's twice 4. It's the third power of 2. And they're all numbers of materiality. We won't go through all the numbers and what they mean, but 12 is an interesting number. I don't know what 12 represents. If 7 represents individual perfection, what does the number 12 generally said to represent? And corporate completeness or perfection. 12 disciples Jesus had, and 12 signs of the zodiac, and there's a lot of other 12s that feature. These numbers appear in the Bible and in many other sacred texts, and in fairy tales. So 7 days is the number. Hence, if beauty does not return until the 8th day, the beast or the material life will die, because it will be unillumined by the light of the true self within. If she stays just one more day to that 8, there will be death. And that's kind of what happened. The beast did succumb, or appear to. Now, those materially minded sisters, don't want to give too much attention to them because they're not worthy of it, but as I said earlier, they can be said to represent our physical and mental natures, respectively. They try to detain beauty from returning, and that's typical of our physical and mental natures. Now, I'm not diminishing the importance of intellect. I mean, I have a few worthless initials after my name before that represent many, many years of study, but really at the end of it I didn't learn much at all. Just many trips around the library. And yet in my daily work as a lawyer I'd be lost without reason and logical thinking and trying to solve problems according to principle. But at the end of the day, that same intellect has caused pretty well all the problems in my life, of which there have been plenty. And as Oscar Wilde once said, terrible though the things the world are, that the world's done to me, or something like that, more terrible still are the things I've done to myself. So I do know all about the physical and mental side of things and how it can lead us astray. And ultimately, reason alone or unaided reason will not bring us truth. It tends to deflect us from the path that leads to righteousness, to use a biblical metaphor. So it's interesting that those two materially minded sisters, one who seems a bit brighter than the other, being the mental over the physical, as opposed to the physical, try to detain beauty. They want to hold back our spiritual self, our true self, from realizing its innate potential and potentiality. They resent beauty's ascendancy over them, over the body and over the intellect. They try to mislead her, to divert and scatter her power. I think I've said enough on that to get the point across. But beauty at the last moment decides that she must return. That little light shining within, no matter what we do, no matter what happens by others, it never really goes out. So she awakens and she decides to go back. She uses that ring, that magic ring that we see in the literature of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and so many myths and fairy tales. A magic ring, a circle, the ring. And that's a very important cosmic symbol, isn't it, of life and death and reincarnation and immortality, but also power. And I think it represents largely power here, but not exclusively. That magic ring. Once again, a reference to the potentiality that we have within, but we so often don't use it. The garden imagery is pretty clear, the imagery of the garden. The beast who seemed to be dead was not really dead. The material may be said to be dead, but it can still be ensouled and is ensouled by the higher self. But the spiritual stoops down to the material beast, loves it, kisses it, embraces it, and the beast once again becomes a prince. Regains its true stature. Now the subtitle of this talk was, the title was Beauty and the Beast, of course, but the subtitle is The Power of Divine Love and True Beauty. Now don't be worried about that word divine, it just really has little to do with gods. As a great humanist, his name escapes me for the moment, he was president of UNESCO for a long time, Julian Huxley. So Julian Huxley said, and he was really not a believer in God at all. He was a well-known humanist, secular humanist, but he said, but he was a religious sort of man at the same time, in a naturalistic way. But he said the word divine originally had nothing to do with gods, but has everything to do with something set apart and sacred and holy. So I'll never forget that with the word divine. So back to this. Where was I? The material takes on the radiant glory of the spiritual and is transfigured by, yes, I know the subtitle, Divine Love. It is the divine love of the beast that releases the potentiality within not only beauty, who blossoms into a princess, but the beast regains his kingdom as well, his status. So divine love ennobles not just us, but those whom we encounter and love. It is the ultimate force in the universe. How else does spirit constantly descend into matter and give of itself, breaking itself into little emanations, manifestations of itself, right? Each one is a divine spark. But it never exhausts itself in the process. It just keeps giving of itself. How does a mother create? Love gives of itself to itself in order to perpetuate itself. I remember of meeting a man and got to know him a little. And I actually put together a thing called the Norman Appeal book of quotations, but he was a Protestant minister, Norman Appeal, the power of positive thinking, and he was a man who was not a man who believed that you were conceived in immortal sin. He really saw people as little gods. He used to say in sermons, as I look out over this vast congregation, what I see here are all little gods. You don't hear that at church too often, do you? But he said that. And the Bible said, when someone said to Jesus, are you claiming some sort of equality with God? And Jesus said to the person, it's in the New Testament. Don't ask me to quote a chapter and verse because I've forgotten. I should have. But he said, quoting from the Psalms, it is written is it not written in the Psalms? Ye are all little gods. And it's in the Bible, Old and New Testament. So there you go. And it's in other places too. We're all sparks of the great fire. So we've got this wonderful image of beauty, this spiritual self, realizing its full potentiality and growing and evolving and helping others too to realize their innate nature. That reminds me of another verse in the Bible, and if I be lifted up, I will draw all things unto me, in John 12:32. So beauty stoops down and lifts the beast up, and he becomes a prince. And beauty marries the prince, who in the words of the story, had once been a beast. And they rule over his kingdom, which is not of this earthly life. The spiritual simply cannot abide with the unregenerate physical, but needs to be regenerated in some way. And I don't want you to interpret that too literally in fundamentalist Christian terms, but as Christian Murray said, we all need to undergo a radical mutation or transformation in which we cast off the false selves that we create through our thoughts, particularly our worldly thoughts, material thoughts. We need to undergo a radical revolution, which only we can bring about. No one else can do it for us. But we do have within us a power that can unleash itself. And the power has various names. Let's just stick with the word love, because that is a prominent thing in this story. We see it in the image of the rose, which is central to the story. Now, the story is one of universal application. It describes events that do take place in the life of every person, whether in one incarnation or over several. It's all about waking up. As the Buddha said, when he was asked, are you God? Are you a demigod? What are you? He simply said, in 3 words, I am awake. And that's what enlightenment is. Waking up. Waking up to what? One's true self. Well, we've all been beasts, and we've all been like those 2 older sisters. I guess there are days in any week when we look back on the day and we think that we really have not been all that in truth we are and are capable of being. I often have days like that, and that's not false modesty. We're all the 3 sisters there. We're the 2 older ones, and sometimes we're beauty, and we're a beast. or a beast that's capable of regaining status as a prince or princess. And it remains for all of us, through love and true beauty, to make ourselves spiritual princes and princesses. It's hard to say, princesses. Anyway, I'll leave it at that, but I welcome any questions.